All right, welcome back, everyone. Today we're going to be going into deployment, and what we'll be using for deployment will be AWS frameworks. So here's the topics that are going to be covered. We'll be going over deployment, DNS, and HTTPs. So we'll go into how to make a secure site and all that good stuff. We're basically just going to learn how to deploy our projects today. Make sure that our database is actually living and hosting or static files. So if you look at the Django documentation before I dive into this, you're going to see in the Django documentation that it talks about how you shouldn't be using run server as a way of serving your static files. So instead, we'll be using a couple of other frameworks like NginX and Gunicorn. NginX will take charge of actually rendering our static files, and then Gunicorn will be what actually hosts our site. So let's get started. This is going to be the project that we'll be deploying. It's the login function, the login project that we made. So we go av@av.com, we could log in, has my name, go to tasks, see the tasks belonging to me. I could go to sign up or log out, come back, and we see that there's no task here. Okay, perfect. We're using hash router and we are using our local host as well. So let's get this up and running. So let's go down the deployment site, goes into things that we should set up before actually deploying our site. So it looks like we need to install Gunicorn. And then after that, we need to first our requirements txt. We need to set debug in settings to false. Allowed host should be a wildcard. And for CSRF trusted origins, we'll do a wildcard as well for now until we can get it deployed and put our name on it. So let's go straight into the project. So here's the project. It's everything that we've seen before. Let's go into the actual manager and let's touch settings. So in settings, we see we're using a secret key with load.env. We just went over debug. We want to switch that to false so that Django knows that it's being deployed. We want allowed host to be a wildcard, and we want CSRF trusted origins to also be a wildcard for now. So CSRF trusted origins, that's just basically saying, hey, who's allowed to make CSRF, who's allowed to have CSRF authentication with this project? So currently I'm making it a wildcard to facilitate the deployment process. But once it's deployed and I smack my actual URL along with my EC2 instance, well, then I want to switch this wildcard to ensure only my site and my site only is able to interact with my database and my APIs, and they're the only ones that can send me CSRF authentication for me to trust. I have my installed apps here, which is both my user app and my task app. If I scroll down, we see that I'm still using PostgreSQL, and it's going to Task Manager. And then we have our static files and our user authentication model. As far as my client app goes, really nothing changes here. The main thing that we want to be able to note is that when I compile my client application, it goes into static. So I need something to be able to host my static files from here. Okay, perfect. So let's get Gunicorn. Now I have Gunicorn, and I want to make sure it makes it into my requirements txt. And we see that requirements txt has now been modified. So I have two things modified, my settings.py and my requirements txt. Perfect. Now that I have that, I want to make sure that all of this gets up on GitHub. I'm going to push that to main. Now that it's all on main, I can move on to working with AWS. Okay, so I have everything going, and now we're going to AWS EC2. So let's go to my AWS dashboard. When you guys go to AWS, the first thing you'll see is this console here. If you don't have EC2 and Route 53 in this recently visited, you could always look them up here. So for example, if I do Route 53, well, it pops up, and I could go to my Route 53 dashboard. Okay, I'll go further in detail into what these are as we go along with the deployment process. So in the EC2 instance, we see I already have a couple of instances running. Unfortunately, I can't demonstrate those without having to take them down. So let's go into launching a new instance. And basically, this itself is an instance, right? It's an actual address that's being hosted by AWS. And that's what we want to have. We want to make our own address that we can have on the internet for people to be able to visit our sites. So let's launch an instance. My web server, so what do I want to call it? I want to call it Task Manager. I'm going to move on to Ubuntu. So I'm going to use Ubuntu. I don't want to use Amazon Linux. I mean, whatever framework you prefer using, go ahead and use it. But Ubuntu is the most commonly used, and it's the one that has the most support for. There's also a huge community that uses Ubuntu. So if you run into any errors, you're more than likely going to be able to find the answer. As far as what type of instance type I want, well, it tells you specifically what type of computer you would be using and how much memory space would be in that inside of it. It typically tells you the pricing as well. Yeah, here it is. So there's the pricing. It tells you how much it costs as you're using this this instance and how it works. So we have it per hour, et cetera, et cetera. But to keep things nice and cheap, I always use T2 Micro for free tier. And honestly, with the level of applications that we're building, unless you went completely above and beyond the curriculum of Code Platoon, the T2 Micro is going to be more than enough to be able to host our sites. For the key pair login, so I want to make sure that I create a key pair so I can actually access this instance that I'm about to launch. So let's create one. I'm going to leave the RSA and the PEM key there. I'm just going to give it a name. I'm going to name it the same thing. That's my application. So create key pair, task manager. Now I have that. And create security group. I have a security group, but I also want to allow for HTTPS and then want to allow for HTTP traffic. So SSH, we know that we're going to need SSH to be able to actually interact with our hosted instance. We're going to need HTTPS and HTTP because in order to be able to actually do anything with this site, I need both of those to be available for me to be able to visit it. Rules resource, allow all IP addresses, access your instance. So here you could create a custom and put something different in there, or you could just make your IP address if you want to be more specific. Typo in the name of your key pair, task manager. Yes, I did make a typo because that's apparently what I do. All right. It's not a big deal as long as I know where it's at and where it's located. So thank you for pointing that out.
Yeah, I don't know if that was going to be like a huge pain in the ass, like 10 steps down the road, you could go back and change it.
Yeah, thank you. So now we have all that done, and I can go ahead and launch my instance. So here it is, launching my instance, and it's done. So it's saying successfully launched. You go to my launch log, so success. And now I want to be able to actually look at my instance. So if I go to instances, it's going to show all of mine. But the one that I really want to interact with is this one. The last one that I just created, Task Manager. And I want to make sure that I'm able to enter this site. And what I'm going to be able to use to enter it will be this public PV4 address. So I could just copy it down here. So I have my public PV4 address. And now I can actually enter my hosted computer through this IP address, but it is still initializing. So let me see what is going on now. Okay. Status check, still initializing. Oh, it's trying. Probably gonna have to rerun this instances after this class, so. refresh one last time. Okay. Okay, so we see that the instance state is running, and that's really what I need. I just need it to be running to be able to actually enter it and push my project in there. So before we go into that, let's go into GitHub and see what I really have on GitHub. So this is what's been pushed up into GitHub. We see that I don't have a .env. I only have my requirements txt. I have my git ignore happening. So there's a couple of files that are missing. So now let's go over and enter SSH terminal. And actually, let me reference the lesson to remember how to do it. Okay, so we have this command right here, SSH, and then we use our PEM key at Ubuntu address. Okay, so let's see, how do we do this? I'm gonna put this PEM key on my desktop really quick so I can access it. Okay, and it says here that what I want to do is I want to run my command with my PEM key .pem with the Ubuntu instance at the IP address. So let's grab that and let's run that on Visual Studios. So I know my private PEM key needs to be switched. And I do want tilde, and I named it task manger, I believe. Yep, task manger.pem. And then it's asking for my address. So I'm going to erase that and place my address. Oh, hello. I guess that doesn't work if you copy something else, right? So let's go back to my EC2 instances. Where'd you go? Here you are. And let's grab that address real quick. Okay, so when I run this, it's going to tell me, hey, I see that you have the PEM key, but it's not known by me. Are you sure you still want to continue? Well, I can say yes, but it's eventually going to tell me that the permission was denied because I don't have the correct permissions. So I don't have the correct permissions. And to fix that, I am going to actually run this next command here, where I'm giving it the correct the correct permissions, basically. So let's go with sudo, and then I think it's chmod 600. And I wonder if that's all together or spaced out. Okay, perfect. And then when you tilde slash and then task manger .pem. That's embarrassing that I misspelled that, and I have to keep seeing it over and over again. No such file directory. Interesting. Okay, let's see. What did I have before? Oh, I need desktop and all that good stuff, don't I? The tilde should have taken care of it, but we'll see. Oh, that did it. So I added a desktop to the front of it because that's where it's located, and I was able to give it permissions. Okay, so I have sudo chmod, gives it permissions, and now I can actually enter my task manger PEM key. Let's see, we have public key, permission denied, identify file. Oh, it's giving me no such file or directory. So desktop again. And there it is. I am now in my Ubuntu instance. And now in my Ubuntu instance, I can actually see that I'm over in, basically I'm in AWS now, and I'm interacting with my actual URL that I'm going to be able to host. So let's get working on here. What is it that I want to do? Let me grab this SSH and drop it here. I like to keep it centered on the, so what is it I want to do? I want to be able to clone my repo. So let's come over to grab my repository. I'm gonna grab this. SSH, I can do ls. We see that it's empty. So now I just basically want to clone it. So now I clone my repository. Go back to the curriculum. And then here's a set of everything that I want to go ahead and install, right? So everything that's living in my local machine doesn't exist inside of this virtual machine. So I need to install everything. It looks here like I need to install Python and pip. We have Postgres that needs to come in. We need to create a user in Postgres. We need pqdev in order for CyclePG2 to work correctly. Then we need NginX. Finally, after we do all of that, we can grab all of our requirements. Then we could create our database. We have to get our migrations into the database. And then we could start worrying about all of the NPM stuff that has to do with React and running our build. So it's kind of a long process because you're basically reinstalling everything, but it should be fine. So let's see. Let's do sudo apt get Python. Is it Python 3? Oh no, I want to update first. So that's going.
So while this is going, technically you're getting billed per hour while you're communicating with the AWS instance. Like when does that start?
Yes, but I'm currently so while I'm interacting with it and it's running, the billing has started. So it runs as things are being utilized, as memory space is being utilized inside of the instance. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I just didn't know if it was like only when like a client side like interacted with it, not when you're just talking to the server. I wasn't sure.
Yeah, so if you're talking to your server and you're using the memory space, then it starts running the bill. And then, so for example, someone mentioned earlier, Postgres is continuously running in the backside of your project, right? So as Postgres is running, it's still racking up prices on you. So by the time the month ends, you may see like maybe a $5 or $2 bill from just your Postgres alone. But then if users go in there and use it, then it might run up. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So now that I have this, I can now install pip. Okay, that's going to take a while. The next thing I need is PostgreSQL. Sudo apt install PostgreSQL. Okay, that's happening. And then the next thing is I need to create the user, which in this case, it will be Ubuntu. But I think I could actually just run the same exact thing. I know it says permissions denied, but I think it does work. Let me see. Yep, it did work. Okay, so now I have Postgres. Now I can install sudo apt install libpqd. Is it apt dash installed? No, it's not. Okay. So app install live pq-def. Okay, that gets me dev. Now I need NginX core. And we already have Gunicorn, so I don't need to install it here. And finally, I can install my requirements and create my database. So let's install my requirements. So pip install requirements. And actually, before I do that, so I need to change directory into the actual deployment lesson. And now I can go ahead and pip install my requirements. Let's see, defaulting to user installation because normal site packages is not writable. You're attempting to.
Need to dash R.
Yep, thank you. Okay, so then while that's working, the next thing I need to do is create my database and then migrate. Okay, cycle PG2 worked well. Okay, so now I create DB and it's task manager. Hey, just to confirm that it exists. So it does exist, currently has no relationships. And now Python manage py. I want to migrate. Okay, Python 3, I guess. Manage py, migrate. Secret key. Oh, so I'm trying to migrate, but it's telling me, hey, there's no such thing as secret key. So I need to create one. So let's do. I'm gonna enter Vim. Go into insert mode, and just real quick, I want to make sure. Oh no, did I do .env or did I just do env? Okay, I did the correct command. Okay, so now I can go into the .env, and then in my .env, I know I have the secret key, so I want to make sure that it's in there. So let's go into insert mode, paste it, press escape, and then colon WQ to write and save this file. Okay, now I can run my migrations. And it seems like now we have a problem. Let's see, the values in the CSRF trusted origin settings must start with a schema of HTTP, HTTPS, but found. Okay, perfect. So let's practice some Vim and command line. So we got this. I want to go into task manager. And I want to do sudo vim settings.py. And it looks like the problem came from here, from CSRF trusted origins. While you're in Vim, see if you can find Leo in there. And then let's go HTTP / wildcard. And let's do WQ. Now let's try to make those migrations. And finally, we see the migrations happening. So now let's make sure that my task manager database is working correctly so I can see the relationships. So there's all the relationships that I want. Everything's in my database. And now I'm good to go as far as that goes. Okay, so the next thing that I need to do is install npm, make it stable, and then run npm. So let's see, the command is sudo apt install npm. And I know I keep referencing the curriculum repo. These are obviously common commands, but I can't memorize them off the top of my head. So I just go back and reference. And then the next thing that I need is -gn. That's just going to stabilize. These two commands are going to stabilize npm. Oh, it's trying. This is probably the part that's the most annoying whenever you're working with this. It's just how long it takes to install these packages. Okay, perfect. Sudo apt install npm. I just did that one, I'm pretty sure. So the next one is -gn. Sudo npm install. Okay, that took care of that. And now sudo unstable. And honestly, anyone who's been working with WSL this whole time, this should be pretty familiar for you. So now I can cd into my project, install the project, and then run the build. So I can do ls, cd into client, npm install. So this is interacting with my package lock JSON to grab all the things that I have in there and ensure that all my dependencies are working correctly. And now I can do npm run build. And this is going to compile my code and create my React project. And then it's going to dump it into my static folder. So let's take a look at my static folder to ensure that it's in there. Or actually ls static. So now we see ASX, index, and VSVG. So perfect. Everything's going to my static folder. And let's see what the next step is. Okay, so now we may want to run server, but remember, run server isn't good enough to be able to actually host our static files or be able to host an actual instance. So let's work through both Gunicorn and NginX. So the first thing that you want to work with is NginX, and you want to tell NginX where exactly it is that it's supposed to grab your static files. So what I like to do is I do ls, I cd into static, and then I run a pwd so that I can actually see the exact path. I copy that, and then I dump it somewhere, just so that it doesn't get in my way. Okay, so now it's been copied. I have access to it, and now I can actually go into NginX. So it tells you exactly which paths you need to do, but let's take a look at them as we work through this. So let's go into etc NginX. Tilde. Okay, so now we're inside NginX and we could see all of these different files existing here. But the main one that I want to work with is going to be the config file. So I can see here that I have nginx.config. So now I can change my directory in there. And let me make sure that's actually where I want to go. Oh, I'm sorry. That's a file, not a directory. So I want to open it up and change the actual user. And let me see. So we want sudo vim nginx.conf. So now in this file, we see that it specifies the user to be www/data. That's not who the user is in this case. In this case, the user is Ubuntu. So I'm going to go ahead and delete that and replace it with Ubuntu. I'm going to save it. And now I can check it out to ensure that it's correct and that my changes were saved. Oh, that ain't it. So let's not do that. nginx.conf. Okay. So my changes were saved and I still have it. Perfect. Is there no way that you can open the SSH file structure in your VS Code? No, there is not, because that's a virtual machine that you're on. So if you run the code.command, it has no idea that VS Code even exists. Okay, so now let's move on into sites enabled and actually render our static files. So I run ls again, or actually I can change directory into sites enabled. I can see default. Not a directory, so let's take a look at it. All right, so here's my default. It has a bunch of stuff that I really don't need, but I don't necessarily want to change it until I get here. This is the stuff that I want to try to change. And tells you here exactly what we want, right? So we want a proxy pass of 9,000, because once Gunicorn is running, it's going to use this HTTP address to actually be able to bind our information. So instead of run server, we're going to run Gunicorn, and instead of being hosted at localhost 8,000, it's going to go to localhost 9,000. And then we have this location, static, all that good stuff. We could just copy it and bring it right over. And let me fix some of this. And we know this isn't the correct static files that we want. So let's switch that up real quick. And instead, I grab this that I wanted to copy and paste in there. So now I have my static directory working well. I don't need to worry about this anymore, so I could erase it. Give me a second, I'll get to your question on the chat real quick. I just want to make sure I don't erase too much. Okay. What does HTTP 0009000 do again? So when we run the server, it goes to 8,000. And that's when we have Django rendering all of our files. Django is not going to be rendering our files anymore. Now Gunicorn is going to be picking up that slack. So because Gunicorn is going to be picking up the slack, Gunicorn compiles all of our code at localhost 9,000. So that's where we're going to compile it. And that's where Gunicorn is going to grab it to host it to our site. Does that make sense, Jose?
Yep.
Yes, basically. Okay, so now we have our alias, we got our static. So this is working well. Hopefully, we'll see. And I can save it. Okay, now it looks like the last thing I need to do is bind it with Gunicorn news project.wsgi -- daemon. So let me grab this real quick. I can do cd tilde again. Go into the deployment lesson. Okay, so now it's looking for news project.wsgi. Well, news project doesn't exist. I know that much. And I know my project itself is called task manager. And inside task manager, there's a WSGI file, which is what Gunicorn is looking for. So Gunicorn needs to make sure that it has access to task manager.wsgi, and then it's going to dash it and it's going to bind it to 9,000. So when you do -- daemon, it's going to continuously keep building it, and it's not going to like occupy your terminal. I don't want that right now because I want to make sure it's rendering properly. So I'm just going to run it 9,000 without the daemon flag. So we run it. It's going to tell me Gunicorn not found, but can be installed. Perfect. So let's install it real quick. I guess I wasn't able to pull it out from my txt. So let's just install that. And let's run the same command. Okay, so now we see the daemon is being hosted. Everything's going well. Perfect. Now I can go back to, I don't need this anymore. I can go to EC2. I see all of my instances. I can refresh it real quick. Everything's running. The status was checked. And I could just grab my IP address and head over to it. So let's grab the IP address that we see here. And let's open up another window, paste it in there, post over, and it tells me, hey, welcome to NginX. If you see this page, the NginX web server is successfully installed and working. Further configuration is required. So this is all working well, and it's being Gunicorn's doing its job and is hosting it. But there's a problem in my NginX config. So let's take a look at what I did wrong in my NginX config. See, okay. Next, so cd tilde, cd into etc/Gunicorn. Oh, nope. NginX. Let's take a look at the config file. The config file has Ubuntu as the user. So I know that's all I need to change here in my config file. So that's working well. Let's exit that. And now let's take a look at sites enabled. Okay, so in sites enabled -default, see this server has all of this good stuff. Server is looking for a proxy pass. It's grabbing my static files. What is going on here? Home -Ubuntu deployment /static. Okay, perfect. So there's the problem. I have static, but I didn't put an ending trailing slash. So it's not grabbing my information. So let's escape, exit out of Vim, and then come back in Vim with sudo. Can use keyboard shortcuts apparently. And let's do insert. I need to do that. And I think I could do sudo service nginx restart, I believe. There's a sudo service restart nginx. Let's see. Okay, perfect. So there you go. Sudo service nginx restart. That restarted nginx to be able to recognize my static files. I want to go back into deployment. And I'm going to look for my daemon command. Okay, perfect. So there's my Gunicorn command. It's using Gunicorn, grabbing all that good stuff. And let's go back over. I refresh it, and now I see my application. So my application is being hosted. I have the database. Currently, if I try to log in, it's not going to work. And that's because all the users that I had in my local machine database don't exist on the database that's being hosted. So let's create a user. Okay, so a user was created, and now let's log in. Now that you see that I've been created, well, let's go to tasks and try to create some tasks. Let me see if I refresh it, will it pop up? Okay, hello. So it seems there's a problem with my task creation, but that doesn't have to do with anything that's going on with deployment. That's more than likely just a bug that I need to fix on my side. But I know my API is working properly because I was able to sign up a user. I was able to use my authentication, log in, and now let's see if I can log out. Well, if I go to sign up or log in, I guess, I log out. Interesting. Something is going on. Let's see. Oh, status 403 forbidden is because I'm trying to send a post request with a user, but it can't send a post request with a user because it doesn't have CSRF capabilities. So let's fix that real quick. I'm gonna take that, go over here. I'm gonna go into my task. I think it's, oh, my task manager in settings. Come over my CSRF trusted origins, enter insert mode. Take off that wildcard. Place my address in there. I can save this file. Run it one more time. Well, now it is the correct database. Okay, so now I see my request is coming in. I wonder if it's still improperly. Okay, the cross-order opener policy header has been ignored because the URL's origin was untrustworthy. Okay, let me see. Okay, so I'm still getting a 403 because it's looking for HTTP at 403 forbidden. So let's see. Okay, so there is something going on. Oh, more than likely I didn't restart NginX as well. Still giving me the same problem. Let me see what I can do here. I'm going to go into Task Manager. I'm going to look at settings. I will demonstrate daemons here shortly. Okay, let's see what we got here. So I have CSRF trusted origins. Could be my allowed host, but I don't think so. Could be that slash. So let's try to do that. Let's restart NginX. And let's run the connection. Okay, if I go to refresh it. Okay, it's more than likely because it's looking for an HTTPS, and that's the reason why it's not letting me do that. So How much extra work is involved in encrypting your site with HTTPS? Not a lot. Let's go into that actually. So now that I have that running so far, I can go into SSL and learning HTTPS. Well, there's a bunch of Certbot commands, but let's mess around with Certbot and the way it works. So I can click on Certbot. Now, I can look at the software that I'm using. Well, I know I'm using NginX. At the system, I know I'm using Ubuntu 20. And it's going to tell me all the commands that I need to use. So we see here, it tells me to install core, which we already did. But let's ensure everything's working properly. And let's look at the curriculum to ensure that everything matches. So we see here the sudo snap. I apologize, everybody. And let's kill this. I'm going to do this in my home folder. Bring that in. You don't have, if you have a domain from Google Workspace, you don't need to buy a domain in AWS. I know there's a way that you could use it still the same way. I don't know who asked that. Oh, that was Jose. Okay, perfect. Okay, so now I have Certbot installed. Well, I know the next thing I need is here. And if I want to confirm that, I could always look at the Certbot site. So we just run that one. Here's the classic Certbot and it matches. Actually, it doesn't. Let's see. So let's grab this classic Certbot thing. Oh, that's what we just ran. We don't need that. And this. Okay. The next thing we need to do is NginX. Yeah, and then it's gonna ask me a couple of things. So please read the terms and services. Do you agree? Sure. Would you be willing once your first certificate is successful be issued? Why not? And then account registered, please enter the domain name you would like to be get the certification to. So this is asking for my domain name. That's where Route 53 comes in. Well, I could look at my hosted domains. Here we have Tango domain registration in progress still. There it is. Okay. So now I have tango.com or tangodeployment.com. I can copy that. And drop it off here. It's requesting a certificate. Some challenges have failed. For help on search. Okay, so let's actually tag this domain name into our EC2 instance. So now let's go into hosted zones. Let's grab this domain name and let's create a record. So when I go into creating a record, it already knows the domain name is going to be tango-dep. I just want a simple a record. And now it's asking me for my IP address. Well, I can go to my EC2 instance. And in my EC2 instance, grab my IP address. Then I can come over to Tango, drop that off. And that's all I need here. Now I can create my record. And the record has been created. Perfect. So now they're attached, they're connected. Now I can come over to Certbot one more time and try to run that command once again. gonna ask for Certbot. Okay, so saving debug log erupted. Oh, did it just ask me for the domain name and I gave it something completely different? Okay, perfect. So then for the domain name, it was tango-dep.com. And it's gonna check to ensure that these are actually connected to each other. Hopefully sooner rather than later. Okay, so I deployed my certificate. My certificate was successful. Says enabled. So now I have HTTPS at tango.com. So now I could grab that. I can go into my deployment lessons, go into my task manager, enter settings. Enter insert mode. And in insert mode, I can now post that here. I can now service NginX. And now I just need access to my daemon side, I believe. So let's grab that command one more time. I don't want to use daemon just yet, because I want to make sure everything's working properly. Something failed. Let's see, LS.
You called it it's called news project on that one.
Oh, that's right. Probably shouldn't just copy and paste things. Huh? All right, so let's go into task manager. It's being hosted correctly. And now instead of going here, I want to go into HTTPS tango-dep.com. And there's Tango. I can log in. There's Francisco. Francisco can log out. Can log him in again. Yeah, as soon as I figure out how to type again. And I can go to task. I can say hello. And now we see that my tasks are being populated. My post requests are going through. And I want you guys to note that any console.log statements that you have, they're still going to render once you go into your deployed site. You won't be able to see your print statements, but your console log statements will still be able to be accessed in your site. As far as code goes, your entire div and everything in here is still exposed. You can still see it. So just be careful with the information that you leave out in the front end side of your project. Okay, and now let's go into daemon. So now that I know that's work, oh, so here's my print statements, right? So now that we see that this is working, well, now I can run the same command, but run -- daemon. And now my server will run, but it will run without occupying my terminal. Kind of how npm run watch, sorry, occupies my terminal. All right. Well, if I don't want it to occupy my terminal, I could just say run build. And that's basically what we're doing here with daemon. All right.
So in this case, when you run the daemon, would you push it to like a log.txt or something like that so that you can still keep track and, you know, log things as they happen on the server? Or could you do that with that statement?
I'm not sure about other type of flags you can add to daemon. I'm sure there's going to be a way to log it. But you may have to go a little bit deeper into the Gunicorn documentation to be able to find it. I apologize for not having a question for that. Not having an answer for that question off the top of my head. Okay, so everything's working well. I can still log out. I know my site's being deployed. Well, now that my site is deployed, now I just need to exit. So I go one back. I think I actually forgot how to exit. So let me check the curriculum real quick. Okay, I restart. Okay. It didn't leave the exit command. I wonder if it's just exit. It is just exit. Okay, great. So now I exited, but I ran that daemon command, right? So even though I exited my terminal, my site is still running. So now I can go to my site, check it out. I can inspect it. Everything's still working well. I can try to log in. And we see that my login's working. I can look at my console. I left that console.log statement. Right now it's saying that it's null because it's not rendering the use effect. But now we see that Francisco's there. Great. And that is how you deploy your site through AWS. I know that was a journey, and we actually did that in an hour. So I hope that was really helpful for everyone. Does anyone have any questions?
Are you still using the database Postgres, or like how's it saving it if it's deployed and someone signs up on your website? Like how does that data get stored?
Yeah, I'm still using the Postgres database. I'm not sure if you remember when we cloned our repository, we had to install everything, right? And one of the things that we installed was Postgres. So we installed Postgres, we created the user to be Ubuntu, and then we created the database name because the database that I used during deployment was living in my local machine. Now I needed to live in my virtual machine. And that's what you see here. Does that answer your question?
So yeah, I think it's so the database is no longer like your local machine. It's like online now. It's
Correct.
whatever service we're going through. Okay. So
Yeah.
you can just log off, you can turn off your computer and it won't turn off the website because that service is now hosting us.
Yeah, so basically,
Okay.
I can, so I'm already logged off, right? We see here that it says log out and that the connection was closed. So I'm no longer connected to that instance, but it's still hosted. You guys could go to tango.com right now and you'll be able to see it. You won't be able to see me being logged in, but you could log yourself in or create a user, et cetera, et cetera. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, okay, awesome. Although I am gonna take this down though, because it does look like it, if you guys keep messing around with it, it might cost me a little bit. Okay. If there are no other questions, I'm gonna stop the recording, but I'll stick around in case you have anything for me. Last shot, any questions?
Did you pick that the domain name? I forgot.
I did, yes, I myself registered
Okay.
it. Did I go into how to get that domain name? Okay, just in case I didn't go into how to get the domain name, here we see this register domain menu. You can put whatever you want to call it. So I don't know, Francisco's personal app and more. So let's say I wanted a site that's called Francisco's personal app and more. I can go and check, and I'm sure nobody's that ridiculous to where they would have that. So now we see it populate. I can buy this domain by continuing to check out. Right now it's completely added into my cart, but it has a couple of different domains that you could use. I'm not sure how using something other than .com might be able to affect your deployment process. So I would stick to .com, plus it's what we always see anyway. Then you continue, you go through the checkout process and it'll be able to create the domain for you. Does that answer your question? I'm not sure if that would even relate it to your question, but I hope this was helpful being able to see.
Yeah, yeah, no, that did. Thank you.
Okay, great.
If we need to make changes, do we just log back into the Vim server and do the updates there?
Yeah, so if we wanted to change something at this point, and let me just stop sharing altogether. Actually, yeah, if we wanted to change something at this point, I would have to change. Let's say we were working on our deployment process, right? Typically, you would have a branch called the development branch, and then your main branch will be used for deployment, or you'll have a deployment branch, and you'll be using your main branch for development. And then everyone would have their own development branches, right? So let's say that I make switches to main that I want to eventually reflect into deployment. Well, I would have to merge main with deployment at some point. And once it merges, then I would have to, again, go through the entire process of cloning that information back into my repository. I would still have all the local machines already there. And luckily, hopefully, none of my folder structure changed, so I don't have to do anything else with NginX as far as configuration goes. But that's how I would get those changes up there again. I would have to clone the repository so that I have those back in there. Does that make sense? I would at least have to pull, if not clone.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay. All right, perfect. Let me find this stop recording thing.